sinner in the church, and he won't do right. Well, what you gonna do? Get him down on his knees. Let the church roll on. 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 Well, the deacon in the church, and he won't do right. Well, what you gonna do? Take his name off the book. Let the church roll on. 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 Well, the preacher in the church, and he won't do right. Well, what you gonna do? Get him out, kick him out. Let the church roll on. Let the church roll on.
Greetings, everybody. Apparently, I'm still a co-host on this show. I actually don't remember when the last time I was here. Some things have gone on. They haven't caught me yet.
Jail Wi-Fi. That's what we blamed it on last time.
That's true. Call this a parochial podcast visit or something. I don't know, or however you want to say it. But we've always prided ourselves on being able to, turn around on some topics pretty quick. I think if we were to measure this in a length of time some listeners could understand, I think South Park could have turned around a topic this fast from conception to animation and airing. So, I think we're in pretty good company. Maybe we're not billionaires like they are yet, but you do it because you love it, not because you get paid. That's what I always say. So
yeah, we're going to stick to that,
whether we want to or not. But we've got a great panel here to talk about something pretty timely. Those of you who know some of our stories, it'll be probably a little closer to home than others. But let's just go ahead and get into it. Chortles, I'll let you introduce our esteemed guests and Wilson.
Well, I'll introduce the topic first. We're going to talk about what's the big deal if you're a Protestant, if you're a Presbyterian, if you're an APARC, or we have a minister from the Presbyterian Church of Brazil with us tonight. If you're a confessional, Reformed, or Presbyterian minister or officer or member, what's the big deal with Rome? What is the big deal with a minister leaving for Rome? And how should that be viewed? And how should we view the Roman Church in 2025? We do have an excellent panel to discuss that. We've got Dr. Daryl Hart of Hillsdale, who wrote this excellent book, Still Protesting, in 2018. It seems like it's newer than that. I'd recommend that to everyone. Still Protesting by Daryl Hart. I think he's writing a scholarly work on some element of Catholicism. Is that right, Doctor?
Right now, you mean? I
thought you've been working on one.
I have another book on Roman Catholicism that came out, American Catholic.
Oh, okay. That yes. I didn't think it was out yet.
Yeah.
But there's that. We also have Dr. Sean Morris, happens to be a pastor at my church, and he's now a doctor as well. So we got two doctors on this show, and he's been around the block a few times on this denominational business. We have our most special and first time guest, Nathan Cerqueira, from I think you said north of Sao Paulo in Brazil, an assistant pastor at a Presbyterian church in Brazil congregation. I've unmuted. You can unmute yourself and you can introduce yourself very quickly before we jump in. So how's I guess it's spring in Brazil.
It is. It's spring. Here I live in the town of Rio Claro. It's a couple 100,000 people. I also pulpit supply for an English-speaking congregation in Campinas, which is about an hour away.
So is that Westerners who live there, or Brazilians who just happen to speak English?
No, foreign students in the University of Campinas, expats, Brazilians who like the traditional liturgy. So
All right, very
that's
good.
the
Well,
community. Yep.
there are probably a few Roman Catholics in your general vicinity.
Yes, a lot. Brazil is majority Catholic country, culturally at least, and most of my ministry is really geared towards people coming from that tradition.
Right. And you said in December your church is going to baptize 12 Roman Catholic adult converts.
Yes, we're gonna be baptizing some people who have come from other traditions as well, Unitarian traditions, some Pentecostal traditions that we consider to be heretical. But the bulk of the baptizees will be former papists.
All right, very good. You had contacted me in the last several days before this PCA thing blew up, and you were talking about whether PCA churches accept Roman Catholic baptisms, and we'll talk about that a little tonight. But that you were on my mind when all this hit because of that conversation we'd had. Very good. Welcome, and we're glad to be glad that you're with us.
Thank you.
And we have a repeat guest, the only, just about the only former NFL player for a shorter time, though it was, in the PCA ministry, Wilson Van Hooser. And you bring the energy and the enthusiasm, and as some of your teammates would have probably said, the funk and the noise, right?
Hey, I'm pumped to be here, and I maybe I could say I am slightly. I'm not quite yet deflated in my being pumped up. If you get my Patriots joke there, so
Well,
there we go.
So, Dr. Hart, we've heard, though no one can admit this for legal reasons, that Wilson might have reason to know a little bit about Deflategate. But who can say for sure? I don't know if is there a football statute of limitations? Wilson.
I can neither confirm nor deny. I mean, I floated away from Tom Hanks on that island, so that's my,
That's what my nuclear scientist wife says about if you ask her if she works for the CIA, it's the same thing. Can't confirm or deny. So that makes me suspicious. I'm sure Sean's a little suspicious of her too, given personal contact.
That's right. Wilson, you're pumped to be here. I've been on the record in the past. I've called you the golden retriever of the PCA, and I stand by that statement.
Hey, I'll take it. I'm not sure everyone in the PCA would call me the golden retriever of the PCA, though.
Well, maybe you're just that dog. So, so what the precipitating event for this Monday night, a rare Monday night podcast, is a controversy that I guess blew up last Friday. It was revealed, posted online. Whether that's a good idea or the best way to do it or not, we can neither here nor there at this point. But it was revealed that a PCA minister announced in a service that he was joining the Roman Church. After he had preached, and his whole homily and announcement was only like 21 or 23 minutes. I happen to have the video of the whole thing, which I haven't posted and I haven't shared. But it was basically a homily with an announcement appended to it. And then he's a musician, performed with the band, served the Lord's Supper, and then was cheered and blessed and prayed for and sent off with what seemed like joy to me. And there was a denominational official present and participating in the seeming commendation. Although maybe he was just trying to be nice. I don't know. But we're not going to focus on really even that controversy, and certainly not the personalities. Whatever happens with those men will be up to the courts that they're subject to, and the courts above those courts, and that will take more or less time. I've heard we'll hear more this week about some of these things, but that's not for us. We're not going to try to imagine what people knew and when they knew it and how how decisions were arrived at because we can't know those things. And it's not necessarily our business, it's the business of the courts closest to the men in the situation. But at any rate, it raises the question, is it a big deal if a Presbyterian or Reformed minister swims the Tiber, jumps to Rome, and what should our reaction to it be? I think one of the controversial parts of this incident in Washington D.C. that area was that the congregants would have no reason to believe that anything wrong was happening, that anything negative or that should be warned against was occurring, and that's hard for me to wrap my mind around. And I think most of us in the PCA are committed Protestants, and that could be the reason this is a big deal to us. So, Dr. Hart, you have followed and studied and worked with Roman Catholics for a long time. I was rereading sections of your book, Still Protesting, and I think personally we can relate in all sorts of ways. But our issues with Rome are theological and ecclesial, and concern eternal things. But what's your immediate reaction to this, and just whatever you'd like to tell us about Rome and Protestantism, and whether the Reformation actually continues?
Well, it seems this one seems odd to me, and I do want to go back and ask you, not to get into the particulars, but since you've seen the video, I am curious if he had already left or not, or this was an announcement that he was converting. But aside from that, because I didn't hear, I didn't see the video. But what struck me as odd is in the environment I'm in, Hillsdale College, and American conservatism, which is populated by a lot of Roman Catholic intellectuals. This didn't seem like an intellectual kind of conversion. And it also, your listeners, watchers, viewers may recall back to Call to Communion, which was this is a website, Call to Communion. A lot of graduates from Covenant Seminary wound up converting, but also attracted some Westminster Philly, some Westminster California guys who put their testimonies online, and you can go there and look at this. Jason Stellman was one of the maybe a decade ago was a big figure in some of those conversions, and this guy doesn't have the profile that those people did. I mean, this fellow, and I don't even remember his name, but having been associated with the Worship Institute at Calvin, now University, it sounds to me that it's more aesthetic than intellectual, and I mean, part of the appeal for Protestants at Hillsdale is that you're joining the intellectual tradition of the West. Some of that is aesthetic, but a lot of it is the philosophy and the politics of it. I'm not saying there aren't genuine, beliefs about Jesus and Mary and other stuff. There's certainly a religious component to it, but a lot of it too is just identifying with the intellectual tradition of the West. And there aren't a lot of people who go to Rome identifying with the musical tradition of Rome, because Rome doesn't necessarily represent the musical tradition of the West in the way that the Germans do with Bach and Beethoven and Haydn, or even some of the English composers. And the music of the Church of England, I think, rivals Russian Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism in any of, whether France or Italy or somewhere else. I mean, come at me if you disagree with that, but still, I think Protestants have a pretty great heritage with that kind of symphonic or church music. So this one really seems odd. the congregation itself doesn't seem like the sort of place that you would go to if you were on the bubble of thinking about Rome. So, the way you talked about people applauding at the end, it's like this is just another flavor, perhaps in the DC Christian playbook or menu. And okay, I'm going to try this one.
Well,
Although,
I think having watched it and having heard all the words that were spoken, it seemed to me that the type of Catholicism, of course, my pastor he doesn't call it a Christian denomination, he calls it a world religion. But there's a whole world in the religion of Catholicism. You've got nuns and slacks, you've got Jesuits, you've got the Knights of Columbus, you've got the PPX, Pope Pius X, that
we got Notre Dame
SSPX.
football.
Yeah, you got that. You got the whole range of not just American culture, but the world culture contained in the Roman Catholic Church. But I think the Catholic social doctrine, social teaching, I think that, based on what I know about this person, I think that probably had as much to do with anything.
Right.
And I
No, that
believe
makes sense.
his next role would be working in an inner city church in the same neighborhood, teaching music. And working with underprivileged children. So I think this is kind of the rare lefty Jesuit, some lay order that works with the poor and the marginalized. I think that's what we have here. I don't think it's purely intellectual. I mean, I guess there's contemporary worship and guitar masses and urban style Catholic missions, but again, I don't think the style of music that they're used to is option one for most Roman Catholics. But I think it's more of a social gospel. I think I gather that's the trigger, but you never know. The person said that he'd been influenced by Roman Catholicism for years. So in a sense, it was a long time coming. But I think an employment opportunity was probably the triggering event or when it happened. So,
Well, that makes some sense, but even then, maybe that would be, the congregation applauded because the guy got a job, and maybe he needed a job. I mean, I don't know.
yeah, and I think we've talked about this privately, and I think I tweeted about it kind of vaguely. I think what you saw there with the reaction of the congregation was sort of the relationalism over doctrine. I've tried to explain to a lot of people that a lot of our, and not just PCA, but new churches, church plants that make a lot of new converts and they go into areas not served normally by our churches, the people may be there largely for relational reasons. It may not be nearly as I don't think that a lot of Presbyterians are built and molded in some of these churches, and I don't think most of the people in the congregation knew that it was a big deal. Probably didn't understand enough about doctrine to know, and that's understandable at one level, but it's also troubling because what we believe does make a difference. It makes an eternal difference, and we'll talk about the differences and the important differences in doctrine. But yeah.
But I mean, do you think, Jordos and anyone else, that if that happened in a mainline Presbyterian church, that it would have had the same reaction? I mean, that's what still puzzles me. I think even the softer Protestants that I've known, when they hear about someone converting, they don't think it's a good thing. There's a tribal sense that we lost one of ours to the other side, and that's what I don't. That's why this one has me flummoxed, because I've not seen this kind of reaction.
Yeah. Sean, any thoughts on that? I mean, you were at Grove City, which is not quite like Hillsdale for its diversity, but you're a young man who knows a lot of people and seen a lot of motion and movement in the church world. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, all conservative colleges need a paradigm to which to aspire. So Grove City's happy to serve Hillsdale in that regard. But
Thank you.
no. Well, let me a couple of things to Dr. Hart's opening thoughts, and then those follow-up thoughts. Yeah, it's a muddled thing. I'm thinking just broadly of the relation of classical Protestants to Romanism, and particularly now in the 21st century. It's a muddled thing because, right, we all have neighbors, we all have coworkers, we all have friends or relatives or loved ones that might be Roman Catholic, and we might generally get on well with them. And I think in many cases folks haven't been pressed, perhaps, to the degree they should be to recognize and respect the huge theological chasm that exists between these traditions. And we think, well, Aunt Martha goes to Mass at St. Mary's down the street, and they're lovely neighbors and they're sweet people, and we get together for the holidays, and it's all well and good. And I don't know about those candles and those statues of Mary, but gee, I don't know. Is it that different? That kind of reasoning. And I think
Yeah,
too,
let me interject because I
Yeah.
was thinking the same thing. It's sort of like, I did time in the kind of the country Baptist world, and sometimes, you'd hear about somebody, they were a Mormon or Seventh-day Adventist or some crazy thing, and someone would say, well, at least they're going to church.
that's right.
And there's some of that with Protestants and Roman Catholicism, but sometimes Protestants they'll go to a Catholic wedding or something, and they kind of miss the doctrinal problems for all the impressive and strange visual elements, and so kind of missing the significance is not just anyone can do it. Anyone can. There's a moralistic idea that, well, at least they're going to church and they're going to live better. And those Catholics, they're against abortion, so they can't be all bad, etc.
That's right. I mean, in our neighborhood, there's a young boy that my boys will play with from time to time. He and his family go to one of the local Roman Catholic parishes in the area, and he's a real sweet kid. He's a really great guy. He's respectful. He's an earnest young man, and we like him a lot. And that's been given a good opportunity for us to have those conversations with our sons about the differences between Reformed and Presbyterian versus Roman Catholic theology. But I get that at one level of folks saying, well, they're nice and they're cordial and they're good, decent people, and they believe in a lot of the same things we believe in, and I don't know. So there's that element. I think another element, like Daryl was getting at, is because for the last 50, 60, 70 years or so, it has felt like conservative Christians have been living in Babylon, culturally speaking. We have found our Roman Catholic neighbors to be very handy co-belligerents in a lot of things. Like you were mentioning, Brad, the whole abortion issue. We've been happy in some regards. The Protestants have to lock arms with Roman Catholics in the cause for life. In many ways, Pope John Paul II was a great advocate for a lot of the things that for life and for a theology of the body and for things like end-of-life care and the sanctity of life in the womb and things of that nature. And it muddies the waters and it blurs the lines, I think, in a lot of folks' minds when we have co-belligerents like Mormon neighbors or Roman Catholic neighbors who are fighting for these conservative, if you like, political causes or cultural causes. And maybe we're not doing, I think in many cases, the hard work of getting down to the nitty-gritty of the huge theological differences. Some would probably say differences of eternal destiny that exist between these traditions. And maybe out of fear of being impolite or something like that, we don't want to broach that subject, so that happens. What Daryl was getting at a few minutes ago, too, I think hits on an attraction item for a lot of people in that I think, and maybe some of the other folks on our panel might disagree, but I think in some regards, Roman Catholicism does have a very robust intellectual tradition, one that I think Protestants have been lagging behind in some regards. And so there's an attraction to that, I think. I think of the huge appeal of Charles Taylor, for example, in recent decades. There's a draw to that intellectually for a lot of folks. And I think in some regards, Protestants have been slow in the uptake, and so we have there now we have all kinds of disagreements. I grant you that, but for the unattuned person who might be getting into the wading into the matter, they say, man, these Roman Catholics have this developed theology of the body, for example, so that they have these answers. For example, when the transgender chaos came upon us, and it feels like some Protestants were caught unawares and unguarded, and were having to play catch up and scramble to come up with something, and so they see that as a defect in Protestantism and a potential attraction point to Roman Catholicism. So that's there's an element there, I think. And then one last thing, and I'll let someone else chime in as well. Dr. Hart asked about what would mainline Protestant reaction be to something like this. Well, I don't know across the board, but at least anecdotally, having grown up in my junior high and high school years in the PCUSA, I can say that if that happened in our circles, it would have been met with barely a shrug. If a person
that's
did
what
that.
I figured. Yeah,
it's now my particular pastor, he was pretty evangelical, so he would have met it with much more than a shrug. But in many of our neighboring PCUSA churches in our county, they were often praying through many of the other sister churches and denominations, as churches will do, but they would regularly pray for the Pope. They would regularly pray for the Roman Catholic Church. And so if someone got up and said, I've been a Presbyterian minister for 20 years, but now I'm going to go be a Roman Catholic priest, I think there might be a sort of, like, you've been one of us and we're going to miss you. But other than that, okay, you're still you're still in a Christian tradition and you're doing good work, so good on you. And that's how the reaction would have been, at least in my circles, anecdotally.
yeah, and of course, an intermarriage wouldn't have been an issue at all.
Yeah, that's right. In
Nothing.
my PCUSA congregation, we had a number of, if you will, mixed marriages of folks, a Presbyterian married to a Roman Catholic, and he would come to worship at our church, but his wife would be at Mass across town, and then they'd meet up for lunch somewhere afterwards, and that's what they did every week, something like that. It was not uncommon.
All right, Nathan, in Brazil, well, I should say in America, we Protestants in the South, some of us, did I just bump him? Okay, he'll reconnect. I think I just clicked the wrong thing. He'll come back.
Brad, while we're waiting to get him back, I wanted to interact with what Sean was talking about, the intellectualism and what people often think what Rome has. And that's so interesting because really the Reformation was, obviously the Latin phrase ad fontes, and it was the Reformers and the Puritans and the post-Reformers who were very much the intellectuals. I think I would, and I think Sean would agree. I think I would just maybe tweak it a little bit and say that the massive amount of non-denominational, 100,000 miles wide, half an inch deep church stuff, that obviously comes across as anti-intellectualism. And that's not working. I do think we have, I think Dr. Hart, is an example of this. I think, Sean and Derek, doing PhD work. I think we do have guys who are intellectuals and who are doing wonderful stuff. It's not quite on the public square, though, than maybe some Roman Catholics are.
Well, the Catholics run Fox News, and if you to hear some people tell it, they run the FBI and the CIA and major feeder universities for the federal government. And
They run the Supreme Court too. Don't leave out.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh
that's
yeah,
right.
no, you got that. So, what I was going to say to Nathan there in Brazil. We PCA people we may rarely run into or bump into Protestant Catholics ecclesially, as far as Catholics coming to us or our people going to Catholics, or even running into people that we know are Catholics on the street or in the Chick-fil-A. I don't know, do Catholics like Chick-fil-A? I'm not sure. But for you, it's an everyday thing. So unmute yourself there and tell us how you're. And of course, the Presbyterian Church in Brazil is not small. Presbyterian Church
No,
of Brazil,
we
but you're still dwarfed by that cultural behemoth.
yeah we are about 700,000 people in the Presbyterian Church of Brazil.
How many was
That's
that?
seven
Seven,
hundred thousand,
700. That's bigger than all of Napark. Yeah.
and back in the 50s, we were the largest denomination, and then in the 60s and 70s, the Pentecostals really exploded in Latin America. But I must say that this good quality Catholics that you guys see, I've only ever seen in the U.S. Like, like you will have great Catholics when they're in the Protestant country. If you go to Mexico and south of that, it's terrible. So in Brazil, if you want to go to the most backward states or the most crime, where they vote for the left and they have the most trouble, there's going to be the most Catholic states. So right now we have a divide in the country, basically the productive half against the unproductive half. And the Protestants are overrepresented in the productive half. So we have Presbyterians and Baptists being the leaders in the cultural revolution happening in Brazil, or trying to take place. Because when you take Roman Catholicism in its natural habitat, it's you speak to a person, the person can barely name 5 books of the Bible. So when the Roman Catholics come here to church and they listen to the Bible teaching we have, they just have so many questions. So syncretic is their belief system. And that's something I largely attribute to the Jesuits. So if you go, what's the Lady of Guadalupe? Oh, that's just one version of Mary. And then you have several, in all Latin America. So even if you talk to priests, the common priests, they're not bad people, but they just don't know the Bible. Like what Tyndale said was right. The plowboy will know more about the Bible than the bishop, and that's what we see here. The kids at VBS, they know more about the Bible than the people who have been Catholics for 50 years. They come to visit the church, and they listen to a sermon, they convert. They have all these sorts of questions about heaven and hell, what happens to bodies, and you see how the influences in their minds are like basically a mixture of a popular shamanism, really. So this very finesse Roman Catholic gentleman intellectual, it's something that you see in England, in the US, maybe in Germany. But there's a book by Philip Schaff in the 19th century called The Principle of Protestantism. And he challenges the reader to contrast England and Italy. And then he says, contrast the free states of America with Brazil. And he's right. What we have here is Roman Catholicism, is barely Christianity.
Yeah,
So
Lloyd
if you wanna
Jones.
see-
Yeah, Lloyd Jones used to, he said, Wales is on this side of the channel, of the Irish Sea, and then you've got Ireland, and he contrasted the prosperity and standard of living and all those things in the early 20th century, and he made that point too.
Yeah, so if you want someone to stop beating their wives when they get drunk, the best thing for the person to do is to become an evangelical Christian. I actually have an article published on that. An anthropologist, a secular one, tried to explain evangelicals in Brazil, a guy called Juliano Speyer, but he knew nothing about the Christian traditions. So I wrote a critical review of his book and published it. And that was my point. So if wherever you want to see like actual social change, people are giving up vices, becoming more productive, becoming more future-oriented, then any evangelical church, the worst assembly of God will trump the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. So, I'm not saying
that's
that,
important. That's important for us to hear because we just don't know that world at all. Let me tell you a little story. One of our church, we work with Peru Mission in Peru, of course, and we've had people go down there a number of times. A lot of confessional Southern Presbyterian churches support and work with Peru Mission, and that's because they were founded by Free Church of Scotland missionaries back in the 1800s, I believe. So we've got that connection. But some our members were with some of the Peruvian people who were Presbyterians. They're driving down the road and they see a roadside shrine. And one of our members says, well, that's kind of like an idol. And the Peruvian said, no, that is an idol. There was no question in their mind. So that syncretic, semi-pagan religion that the Jesuits sort of cobbled up to appeal to the locals, 500 years ago, is still a thing, and we can hardly relate to that.
Yes, it's the same. The same applies in Brazil, and I say just straight up that Brazil will either go Protestant or become seventh world, because there's going to be no in between. It's either going to be a country where people are future oriented, they're frugal, they're serious, they like to work, or they're going to be, we're not going to stop the downward spiral we are in right now. And religion plays a major role in that. I'm not saying that I am socially insensitive to Catholics as co-belligerents, as Sean Morris said. If Muslims were hitting the cathedral in Montreal, I would lock my arms with the Catholics to defend the cathedral. But if we come to the matters of faith that impact how life is lived out, the Roman Catholic system just does not offer something that is actually life-changing. And I attribute that to the low priority they have on the Bible. Like, only evangelicals actually take the Bible seriously for what it is. The Bible testifies of itself. In their system, the church testifies of the Bible, and then who testifies of the church? Well, the church itself. For us, it's the other way around.
Yeah, the church is self-attesting rather than the Scripture. All right. So we have with us, he may not look like it, but he's a theologian of some weight, and I mean that figuratively. Derek Bright is with us from Aliceville, Alabama. And he takes this theology stuff seriously, does Reverend Bright. And I, for one, would like to hear some of what he has to say about this matter, this issue.
Well, I have a lot to say. I'll try to keep it short and just say that, this shows, once again, a very fundamental lack in education, ministry models, and proper confessional understanding. Of course, in the PCA, we don't have.
So what do our confessions? I'm sorry, I have ice in my mouth. It's a habit I can't break. What do even the revised, American confessions and our catechisms, what do they say about Roman Catholicism?
Well, interestingly enough, you could go to Westminster Confession, chapter 24, paragraph 3, I think. That's a chapter on marriage, but it mentions papists and Roman Catholics as idolaters and forbids marriage of a true believer to an idolater like a papist. The following chapter also has strong language about Roman Catholics. So even though we don't have the original Westminster Confession in the PCA that says the Pope is the Antichrist, we do have a couple chapters that at least affirm that. And not only that, but then you go into questions or subject matter like the sacraments in the standards, and they make explicit statements in the standards going against the teaching on the sacraments. You look at the Westminster Standards, chapter 1 on the Scripture, and there are explicit statements in there meant to combat false views, even of Scripture, such as even what Rome has. Not that they don't believe the Scriptures. They would, of course, confess that they believe the Scriptures, but where they place Scriptures in relationship to tradition and these parallel tracks of authority, and also the authority of the Pope. So there's actually a tremendous amount that our standards have to say regarding this issue. And I find it, when I was in seminary, the seminary I went to, Reformed Theological Seminary in Atlanta, we had to take our confessional documents to, we had to take our copy of the Westminster Confession to virtually every class, at least every systematic theology class. Well, I was talking to somebody today who went to a different seminary and said, in their pastoral ministry class, they had to read they said at least 3 books by Henry Nouwen. And this is a Reformed supposed seminary. And so I'm reading in seminary, I'm reading these things. Well, because the model that I was trying to be, or that they were trying to teach me, was Reformed pastoral ministry and the proper use of the ordinary means of grace. And it's not that you can't learn anything from Henry Nouwen, but when that's your model that you're being fed, well, naturally you're going to have more of an inclination to those things because that's what you've been taught. That's what you've been discipled in. So we really need to get back, in my opinion, to discipling people in the true Reformed faith using the standards that have been given to us. It just shows a fundamental lack. And also, by the way, and I'll say one more thing, is it also shows really that we have a lot of men in our denomination that it's not simply that they're ignorant of the standards, but they just flat out don't agree with them. And maybe they won't voice all their disagreements. But these things,
there are exceptions sometimes to that you shouldn't to the chapter on marriage that you mentioned, and it almost always has to do with Roman Catholics. That's almost always what we're talking about here.
So I've got a lady. I've got a few former Roman Catholics in my church, and I've got a young lady who is soon to join our church. And it was remarkable. I was listening to her. I took her and her significant other out to lunch one day, and I said, "So what made you want to leave the Roman Catholic Church and come to our little country PCA church here every Sunday?" And she said, "Well, I started studying the Scripture, and come to find out, a lot of things I was taught just simply aren't in there."
Imagine that.
And she said, "The more when I come to your church, I just get so much Scripture, and that's just something I wasn't getting." And then she began to describe her views, and virtually everything she explained to me, I said at the end of the conversation, I said, "So what you're really telling me is you're a Protestant. All the views that you just espoused to me, and your rejection of some cardinal truths, you're really a Protestant." Working some things out, and that's been true. But it was just so remarkable. For her, it was a night and day difference. It was it was really walking in her own way from darkness to light. And I think we've got a lot of men who just don't see it being a darkness to light issue. There's shades here of gray, and they're okay with that. We're all part of the big one big happy ecumenical family.
All right. Dr. Hart, any reactions to anything that you've heard here? Anything that confirms or contradicts or enlightens you on any of these points? But let me unmute you. Hold on. Here we go. All right. You're good.
I guess I'm surprised. And I wonder how much this is in light of what Derek was just saying. If Derek doesn't mind me using his first name, but that there would be...
It's the Honorable Right Reverend Derek Bronson. Thank you.
That there would be nonchalance in conservative Protestant circles about Rome. It makes me wonder if some of this is generational. I'm an older guy, and I can remember John F. Kennedy as president, and that was fine. And I can remember, I had no idea of Rome really before Vatican II, even though I was alive then. But there was a big controversy over evangelicals and Catholics together back in 94 or so, where Colson and Chuck Colson and Richard John Newhouse. And Newhouse I had a lot of respect for, and I appreciated Colson. It wasn't like I had disrespect for him, but J.I. Packer signed that. R.C. Sproul went ballistic on Packer for good reason. It kind of led a little bit, I think, to Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals being formed back then. And it's, I know time moves on, and it's not as if those sorts of controversies or those sorts of positions taken in the mid 90s are settled now 30 years later, but still, I thought that was an important moment. And it could be that younger people just aren't as aware of it. But even then, the version of Rome that I see, not from the medieval world or either the trad parishes, is a kind of Christianity that has all the earmarks, in my view, of liberal Protestantism. It's really squishy.
Mm-hmm.
It's really kind of trendy. It's writing right up to the line of ordaining women, but not. And I mean, it has no appeal. I don't see how it would have much appeal to people who are a conservative inclined, even politically. So, that's another reason why I don't get it. Now, I mean, John Henry Newman, Thomas Aquinas, you go down that road. Okay, I can sort of understand some of that, but then you're going to have to go to a parish where most of the people probably, and your priest probably doesn't talk about those people.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody brought up earlier Charles Taylor, who's a very accomplished philosopher, but that's not going on, in my estimation, in most parishes as part of their spiritual or intellectual lives. And I'm not trying to diminish Rome. I mean, I have a lot of great colleagues here who are Roman Catholic, and they're really great people and good friends, and I hope they're not watching. But
we hope they are.
I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it. And especially if you're in a Presbyterian church that's somewhat confessional.
Yeah, let me share something about the homily that preceded the announcement, because again, I've seen the video. The sermon was not, an anodyne generic sermon. It actually concerned what I perceive to be a commendation of Roman Catholic spiritual practice, talking about practicing the presence of the Lord. I mean, that's a vaguely Roman Catholic spiritual practice. I think we do have younger guys, and some of this almost may have come out of the emergent movement, where this contemplative spirituality and labyrinths and prayer walks, and I don't think anybody's using rosary beads or anything like that. I knew a PCA church years ago. I think they finally stopped. They would do a men's retreat of silence to a Roman Catholic monastery once a year. And I always thought that was bizarre, but it's just to say that there's this dabbling, and it's like a mashup, eclecticism is highly valued. Choices, build a bear, create your own adventure, all that stuff. All that plays into, that just means that they're, Anglican elements. I don't know how many Eastern Orthodox elements we have, but, we had a member from our church go to Eastern Orthodoxy. And we've had one, or maybe at least one, go back to Rome. I think some people who grow up Roman Catholic and then maybe they have a tragic event in their life, some of those people are tempted to go back to Rome. And I think that's worth if you're a church officer, looking out for. If you know that a member maybe is not all that committed and they've got a Roman Catholic background, they need help and they need attention, and we need to keep an eye on those people.
Brad,
go ahead. Wilson, you work with were you ever an RUF guy, or you just you look like one? But
I look like one, and again, I'm just pumped to be here. Yeah.
But you do work. You work with younger people, and
Yep.
you may have some perspective on this.
Yeah. Even my first year seminary. So I actually transferred to RTS Jackson, where I graduated from. But my first year seminary was at Gordon Conwell, and at least at the time, it was required that I don't know if it was just for first years or if it was just for a certain class, but it was required for the students to go to a monastery to do a time of a retreat of silence and spiritual formation. Henry Nouwen, all that, that's in the waters. Yeah, and you have the emergence of like a John Mark Comer, he's basically a Roman Catholic, and unfortunately he's really been a wolf in sheep's clothing, and we've heard numerous Protestants, young and old, who've been enamored with this guy, and then you just keep unpacking this, and you realize he's got some very unorthodox, very anti-creedal views of God. But that stuff still it lures in young people. The supposed intellectualism lures in young people. But then I don't know who it was, but someone tweeted the other day that it's just easier to go with rituals rather than repentance. It's a lot easier, and I think what we see is, the flesh doesn't want to do what faith does. The flesh wants fleshly, tangible things to put their hope in, and rather than resting upon Christ. And so, yeah, we see it a lot in Stillwater. We see it. It's a curiosity for young people. There's definitely two big Catholic cathedrals here. It's funny, right now we have two visiting couples who one of the significant other is a Baptist, the other is a Catholic. And it's so funny, at different times they've come to us and they've said, yeah, we want to try out Presbyterianism because it seems like it's kind of in between. And so I've had to say, well, no, that's Anglicanism. Anglicanism is really the halfway house. And so that's always been interesting conversations. So, yeah, I think it is. I think it's trending for young people. I think it's something that they're interested in. And unfortunately, it's just another thing that the self-righteous flesh wants, it's not satisfied with Christ alone.
So,
Dr. Hart, this won't get you in trouble at all, but I'd like to note that most Anglicanism in this country and in most parts of the world is actually Anglo-Catholicism, or heavily influenced by something much closer to Catholicism than most of us, I think, realize. But being there in Hillsdale and having Anglican friends, do you see the Anglicans as a halfway house to the one true church?
Sometimes, but I mean, I think the priests or rectors, or vicars, I can't keep up with the titles.
They don't even know.
At the local Anglican parish, have been pretty solidly Protestant and concerned about Hillsdale students converting to Rome. How they've addressed it is another question, but I regard the Anglican Church here as a decent place to go to avoid Rome. But some students are going to go there anyway because of the intellectual component here. But what Wilson was saying, it did remind me of what was in the New York Times maybe 2 years ago. The kind of, I don't know, it was like goth. It was all sorts of weird kind of Roman Catholic, maybe even some dabbling in Eastern Orthodoxy, written by that woman whose name I can't remember. She's a journalist. Maybe she has a PhD too. And she shows up as kind of like speaking for the millennials or something, or young millennials, and there is a kind of urban. There was at least a couple of years ago a kind of urban trend among hipster urban people going to traditionalist, seemingly traditionalist Eastern Orthodox Roman Catholic churches that, again, Presbyterians seem to miss. And in the context of New York City, and, I mean, I don't want to speak poorly of the dead, but, it didn't seem that Redeemer Church or Keller was hitting that demographic, even though earlier in his ministry in New York City, he was, I think, picking up a fairly strong trend among the young New Yorkers.
Yeah, I think a little known fact is that there's a huge number of young Asians at Redeemer, and without the Koreans, Chinese people who move there to work, some of whom have a Reformed background or at least a Christian background, without those people, Redeemer would not be, or the Redeemers, the many, the 3 or 4 that they have now, would not be nearly of the size that they are. And I don't think they typically go Roman Catholic. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Right.
So the question of before we want to talk about Roman baptism at the end, but let's talk about aesthetics and whether that's the
Brad.
yes, Nathan.
There's one case of a Presbyterian minister here who converted to Catholicism, and he was Tim Keller's interpreter when he spoke to Portuguese-speaking audiences. So the man in the Tim Keller movement here in Brazil is one who, it's like the one case of minister in our denomination that went Roman Catholic. And he now sells online courses on how to pray the rosary and things like that. So the emergent movement, Keller movement, seems to have made him invulnerable to that.
Yeah, that probably didn't help the I'm not trying to be crass, the brand down there. So, all right, that's interesting. So, to what extent, we talk about smells and bells with high church worship, and I wrote a cheeky piece today about what you wear matters. If you dress like a Roman Catholic, you may become one. If you're all about eclecticism and mixing things up, and part of what you mix in is Roman or high church, that's probably not going to prevent you. It's not like a vaccination. You take a little bit of Catholicism to inoculate you against the real thing. A little bit turns into a lot sometimes. It's like maybe the inoculation against Roman Catholicism is no more effective than the old mRNA vaccinations were. Maybe not safe and effective in every case. But what about the aesthetics? If you travel in Europe, you see these stunning buildings with Gothic architecture and stained glass, and they're utterly empty. And you go to the front, like in Canterbury Cathedral in England, the seat of the Anglican Communion. Their worship services meet entirely in the choir area, and there are about 40 or 50 seats, and that's how many seats they need to have their weekly worship services. But it's all very impressive. The aesthetics, the antiquity or appearance of antiquity really impress people. So how much of that is attributable to the appeal of Rome? Sean Morris, you're a snappy dresser and you like fancy music, so maybe this is in your wheelhouse.
I think that's a huge part of it, Brad. I think someone in the comments mentioned this earlier, and I think that Dr. Hart is spot on as well. When I mentioned Charles Taylor earlier, I'm thinking of a particularly niche group of people that are, sharp guys, sharp gals who who are well read in these things, and they find the appeal of certain writings to that, and they are drawn into that line of thinking. But again, that's a niche appeal, that intellectual bent. I think for far more people, it's the liturgy and the aesthetics that's what gets them, and they are drawn in by that. But let me also say this, that Rome, for all of her theological and doctrinal errors, devastating errors, she's done a really good job at propaganda. And I mean that sincerely, because when you get behind it, you'll find that it's not true. But they've done a really good job at propaganda in presenting to, as an outward face of, this is the church where we've had this tradition unbroken for 2,000 plus years. One true church, one communion. What you get here is what everyone believes everywhere, and it's always been this way. And so you can come in here and you'll have stability, and you'll have grounding, and you'll have 2 millennia of unbroken tradition, and you'll have an institutional and intellectual coherence and a weight behind it. And there is a draw to that, I think, for a lot of folks, particularly, and we can talk about this later if you want, those who perhaps were reared in the bizarre world of North American non-denom megachurch evangelicalism, and so they overreact and swing to the other end of the pendulum because they perceive it to be something historic and weighty and consistent. However, that's the propaganda, right? But when you research Roman Catholicism for more than 12 minutes, you'll find that there's every single bit of iteration and variance and variety in Roman Catholicism that you'll find in Protestantism. Every single kind, you'll find it. You'll find the high Latin Mass and the traditional movement of Roman Catholicism. But then you'll also find a not even quasi, but full-out charismatic Pentecostal varieties of Roman Catholicism in parts of Latin America and Africa. You'll find those folks who hate Vatican II. You'll find those folks who love Vatican II. You'll find these, what Dr. Hart was saying, basically the equivalent of squishy liberal Protestants and an expression of that in Roman Catholicism. You'll find contemporary style. You'll find more traditional style. You'll find, you name it. You'll find those who are almost veritable female priests and things of that nature. So for all they want to say, oh, well, there's whatever they say. I don't even know the figure they spit out. There's 27,000 different kinds of Protestant sects, SECTS. Well, you may claim to be under one umbrella of Rome and under the one umbrella of the Pope, but there's 27,000 different varieties of Roman Catholicism. And so when someone says, oh, I'm becoming Roman Catholic, or I believe I'm coming into communion with Rome, you can say, and I mean this not snarkily, you can say, which one? Which version of Rome are you coming into? Because it's not just the outward face that the Vatican would care for you to think it is. There's all kinds of variety and iteration.
Yeah, and to the point about propaganda, Dr. Hart has an excellent chapter in Still Protesting called Is Protestantism New? And it sort of debunks the idea that the early church bore any resemblance to what we think of as the Roman Catholic Church. And the basic doctrinal issues are outlined as well. But this is a great book. And Dr. Hart, any thoughts on that?
Oh, it is a great book. I can't.
No. I meant on the subject matter. Yeah.
Well, the aesthetics. I haven't spent a lot of time in Roman Catholic churches. I go for weddings. I go for funerals occasionally. And some of the worst liturgical music I've ever heard has been the post-Vatican II liturgical music. Now, I haven't been to a Latin Mass, and I don't know what they do there. They probably chant a lot of it. And I have no idea what kind of music they use for the chants. Just because it's chanted doesn't mean the music is any better necessarily. But, and I may be showing my bias, but I think a kind of high church Lutheran service or a high church Anglican service has everything going for it that Rome could muster. So I get the buildings. There's some great cathedrals in Europe, especially, but also some in the United States. But I don't think aesthetically Rome, again, I'm maybe showing my bias, has as great appeal as say Anglicanism does. And again, church music in the Anglican tradition, man, I just can't imagine a better place to be, unless you're going to sing psalms all the time. But even there, with the Anglicans, you're chanting psalms usually, at least in most of the services. So the more traditional parishes. So I don't. For me, I understand the intellectual stuff, the appeal of Rome, and maybe some of the political theology. But now that we have Christian nationalists among Protestants, and they're recovering the Protestant magisterial tradition on politics, well, we don't. Why do we need to go to Rome for that? I'm kidding.
Well, right. And I think you're right, Dr. Hart, which is why I think that the propaganda has been so effective, because I'm with you. I think that the Reformed and the Lutherans and the Anglicans, the classical Protestants, have the intellectual resources and rigor and an aesthetic weight to it as well that ought to be attractive and scratch that itch. Again, I'm going back to the folks who grew up in non-denom megachurch chaos, and they're sick of it. And unfortunately, because I think either they weren't exposed to it or because Rome's propaganda has been so effective, they overshoot and they bypass Anglicanism, Lutheranism, and Reformed Protestantism altogether, and they just go straight to Rome. They think, oh, I'm sick of this non-denom chaos. I want to go to something that's aesthetically rich and traditional and has a gravitas to it. And I guess that's Rome. My Roman Catholic neighbors, they say they have that. I've seen it from what I can find online. And they just bypass us altogether, and they go there because that's the liturgical and aesthetic itch that they're looking to scratch.
You have to ask yourself if people actually care about or listen to preaching. Because when we get to the doctrinal issues, salvation by faith alone, through grace alone, through Christ alone, it's a different religion. It's a different thing. Work your way to salvation, spend a few millennia in purgatory, and you might make it to heaven. That is the doctrine, right? I mean,
it is.
Yes. And of course, they still give indulgences too, but they're ridiculous. Go to this beach event, this beach youth event, and you have a plenary indulgence. And I'm sure everybody really takes that seriously. It's just, it's beyond. It's like there's something more. There's something more going on here. And like Chris Gordon asked in the chat, does salvation matter anymore? Does soteriology matter? And I think for the people who can switch willy-nilly between them, I think the answer is no. Apparently it doesn't matter. There's something else.
Well, if I may, like a good Protestant pastor, I have icons in my office. I just don't pray to them, right? But we all have busts and pictures of people. And one of them that sits on the shelf with all my different Bibles is I have a bust of John Rogers, who was the first Marian martyr in 1555, the first of around 300. And I was thinking about all this today, and I walked into my study at the church and saw the bust, and I thought to myself, you back up a few centuries, right? You go back to 1555, and you say, I'm a Protestant, and that was going to get you burned at the stake. And didn't matter if you were man, woman, or child, you were going to be killed. I mean, there's one martyr under Bloody Mary was a teenager that they beat. They apparently weren't trying to kill him, but they beat him so bad he ended up dying. And you were being pulled out of your church, and you were marched down the street. Often you were in prison for over a year. I mean, there were some men who they went into prison for preaching the truth. Their wives were pregnant at the time, had the baby, and then months later, the man is being walked down the street past the church he pastored in, and there he sees his wife and family and that newborn that he's never met before. And the only time he sees that newborn is on his way to go be burned at the stake for the truth of justification by faith alone and Scripture alone. And so the fact that we've got some ignorant, knuckleheads who want to play footsie with Rome, to me, is absolutely astonishing, considering what our forefathers went through to get us here, to be able to worship freely in this country, or in Britain for that matter, if you want to be in Britain, to worship freely and to preach the Bible freely. And it's like, well, one holy Catholic Church, right? I mean, we're all together. That's absolutely insane. Absolutely.
Well, and Derek, is kind of like the people who are not helping with this. It's like watching a friend have an affair, and they're not there to say, "What are you doing?" But they're applauding and being like, it's just whatever feels good, and that's what's going on. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're right about we're missing the fact that we have Bibles that have been handed down to us in blood. We've had teenagers and elderly who have died for saying they were Reformed and saying they were Protestant. That's very much forgotten.
Well, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, as Tertullian said. And sadly, and many of our brothers, I think we have enjoyed the cushion so much that's been afforded to us that we forget. I remember Mark Dever telling a story once. I saw some video he was doing. He was speaking in a church, and they had a stand. It was a historic church where an hourglass used to be. And he tells the story about the hourglass was a gift to the congregation. And, at the end of an hour sermon, you would, if the congregation may choose to flip it, and you could preach another hour. And somebody objected and said, well, why in the world would you do that? And what time does that leave for worship? Right. Yeah. Because you got to have time for worship, because apparently listening to a sermon is not worship. And one of the things Dever said was, you don't understand, when they gifted when they gifted the pastor this hourglass, many of them could still smell. They knew that smell of their parents or their grandparents burning flesh, and they knew that smell, and they knew that every turn of the hourglass could be their last. And we just don't have, we have such a luxury now that we can do 15-minute homilies, and who really cares? And unfortunately, these soft times have really created soft men.
Well, related to that too is, and Chris Gordon's question on salvation. I mean, I do think that there's not. I mean, Roman Catholics and Protestants, Reformed Protestants, have different understandings of human nature and creation. Human nature in creation. Don't expect me to explain it, but also different understandings of the fall and then what baptism does. But I was listening to, sorry to say, but it was a good interview overall. American Reformer had Josh Mitchell on, who's a political philosopher at Georgetown and has written a book about the Great Awakening. And he made a point pretty vociferously that that America has really lost a sense of original sin, and that the Protestant churches are failing to talk about sin as much. And I think he's got a point about that. I don't know how it's going in all of our congregations in NAPARC world. But if people were worried about sin, and this goes back to your point, Chortles, and you were worried about salvation, and I mean, the Roman Catholic system of going to purgatory for who knows how long, and not even having a clear sense that you're gonna get out, whereas as a Protestant, you're already a saint right now. You're a saint, and over the weekend, I guess, or sometime last week, Pope Leo canonized 2 Italian boys, one who died in 1906, another one who died about a century later. And Okay, so they know some who go to heaven, but it's just an odd thing to think that you're going to play around with your eternal destiny, conceivably the way you are in Roman Catholic teaching.
All right.
Speechless.
Yeah. There's. I mean, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what to say to that. Um, let's. I think it's. I think it'll take the rest of our time to talk about this subject of baptism. Um, I'm pretty sure in some Protestant denominations or NAPARC denominations, there's probably a settled conviction that we do or we don't accept Roman Catholic baptisms. Uh, if you say we do, it's because it's Trinitarian, it's issued with the right words. But or if you're not going to accept it, you're going to say, well, they're not a true church, so their ministers can't be true ministers who are lawfully ordained. But in the PCA, we're all over the map, and maybe even people on the call tonight that don't all share exactly the same opinion. The session that I serve on has the position, maybe not set in stone or written down, but we generally we do. I think we do not accept Roman Catholic baptisms as valid, and so we would you might call us Anabaptists, but we would rebaptize a Roman Catholic who was joining our church. But let's talk about that. I think, kind of shelving that issue or downplaying it helps us not think about Roman Catholicism and maybe not have the convictions about it that we should. So, and Nathan, you contacted me a few weeks ago about this question, asking our position. I'm pretty sure I can guess yours, but does the Presbyterian Church of Brazil or your congregation accept as valid the baptisms given in the Roman Catholic Church?
No, we don't, and we have inherited this understanding from the Northern Presbyterian Church. Um, when Princeton and Westerner, when now Pittsburgh, sent men here, uh, the Board of Missions from New York uh, followed the determination from the General Assembly of the Northern Church from 1845 that the Roman Catholic baptism was invalid, was not a true church. So on January 12th, 1862, when the first Presbyterian church in Brazil, the one in Rio, was organized, there were two members that were received. One was Episcopal, so he was not baptized, and another one was a Brazilian Catholic, and he was baptized. The first minister, the first Brazilian minister, was a former priest, and he was baptized by a Northern Church minister. So both the Northern Church, the Northern Church and the Southern Church, they both viewed in the 19th century the uh, Roman Catholicism as an untrue religion. So we have this in our Book of Order, like I have here. We have our Principles of Liturgy in Article 12. It says that anyone has not got the evangelical baptism has not been baptized. So it's set in stone for us. We do not accept the Roman Church's baptism as valid, not until at least the Council of Trent reverses the anathema on sola fide and some several other serious perversions. The way
Dr. Hart, can you tell us when kind of the position shifted on that? He's referring to 19th century Northern Church, PCUSA doctrine coming out of Pittsburgh and
Well,
Princeton.
it's been a while, but there was a fairly large debate, I think, between Hodge and Thornwell over this, and Hodge argued for accepting Roman Catholic baptism, and Thornwell or Dabney or both argued against. But what became the official policy of the church and whether they left it to congregations, I don't know. I think in the OPC, I think we leave it to congregations I'm not sure if we have anything in the book of church order. I mean, but Chortles, what you said to begin this, I probably favor not rebaptizing, because John Calvin would then not be baptized. I mean, it is the Anabaptist problem. If you insist on rebaptizing, you do have a whole host of original Protestants in the 16th century who were never baptized because they
Yeah,
didn't want to be Anabaptists. I mean,
yeah,
at least for that reason.
yeah. And some people say, that should have, that would have changed post Trent, where they hardened in their most egregious errors.
Yeah.
Some people might even say, well, since Vatican II, it's not valid. It's a tough issue because, I mean, but I'd like to hear from everyone else. We've heard from Nathan and Dr. Hart. Derek, I'm pretty sure I know where you're going to land on this, but who knows? Sometimes you bring in something from left field. I've learned that much about you.
Yeah, well, I actually would I would not rebaptize a Roman Catholic. I do take the issue obviously seriously. It's something I think about regularly, especially with former Roman Catholics coming into my congregation. I do take what I would consider the historic Reformed Calvin view on this. There's enough vestiges of the true church left to be able to take it, but I would say though that it's something I do consider. It also would cause me to question the validity of some mainline denominations in their baptism. And I think that's a real issue that is, I think, very closely related to this. If we're going to reject Roman Catholic baptisms, which is a valid position, I think Thornwell was wrong, despite my love for Southern Presbyterians. But we've got mainline denominations in their general the denominational meetings holding prayers to Allah, and some have such heretical views on human nature and sexuality, and you hear the preaching, you hear their preaching and their gospel presentation, and there's no atonement, there's no blood, there's no cross. And so you say, what do they have? Do they have valid ministers, right? Is that a valid church? And so say all that just to say it's a complicated issue. And for me personally, if I were to go down the road of rebaptizing Roman Catholics, I think I would find myself perhaps saying we should rebaptize even potentially some PCUSA people. Now you've made the problem even more complicated. So I would not rebaptize personally.
Let me make this point, which we didn't make earlier, and I think we all assumed. We're not saying there are no Christians in the Roman Catholic Church. There are certainly Christians who are involved in it, but they're Christians largely in spite of the ministry of their church and what their church proclaims and believes, rather than because of. It's the mere grace of God and the vestiges of the word that persist. Probably is the way they were converted. Of course, our hope for them is that they'll come out into a true church. So we don't say that everyone attached, especially maybe if they've culturally always been Catholics and don't have a lot of alternatives. But with the man who left the PCA, he happily, intentionally knew better and attached himself to the Roman Church anyway. I put that person in a different category than a lot of the people that we might run into.
Yeah, but somebody who even grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, but maybe because there is so many differences in the parishes and there's so many, they can hear minimal gospel truth and say, I don't really get all the other. This is the culture I live in, but I do trust Christ. In fact, I went to high school with a girl who I was trying to share the gospel with her because I found out she was Roman Catholic, and she didn't buy into a lot of at the time at least, she didn't buy into a lot of the other stuff going on with the church. And she was very, she would say, I trust Christ for my salvation. There's a lot of things I'm not so sure about, but I know that Jesus died to save sinners, and I'm a sinner, and I believe that's what. And that person is totally different from somebody who willingly commits apostasy and willingly severs themselves from the branch, from the true Church of Christ, and from the tree, actually. So those two people that's two different categories for me. Of course.
And we can't see into their hearts, and we don't even presume to. We're speaking in generalities. But we've got a few more minutes, so Sean and Wilson, thoughts on baptism? I mean, it's the entrance to the visible church, and how we think about that is important. And if you're a church officer, it's going to be a vexing issue, but also your responsibility to make the call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, baptism, I'm in favor of it. That's my no. Interestingly, I did my senior thesis in undergrad on Hodge on this very issue because I was so interested in it. I was a teaching assistant, research assistant to one of the faculty members, and so one of our summer projects.
You've always been a real wild man, haven't you?
Out of control, man. Yeah, let me tell you about my wild days as a summer intern at Grove City, poring over microfilm of old Princeton Review articles for one of our faculty members, and that was one of the things we had to do as a senior thesis in the theology department, and so that's what I did was on Hodge and the whole question of the whole 19th century debate on Roman baptism, and ultimately, and of course, Hodge I have huge respect for Hodge. He's an intellectual titan, but the more and more I studied Hodge's position on the matter, the less and less I became convinced of it. So I come down with Thornwell and the Southern Presbyterians on this one, Brad. I think that on this matter, our friend Hodge he got it wrong, and I'll just throw this out there because it's forthcoming in this year's Confessional Presbyterian Journal, Lord willing, an article on the matter. A lot of folks in our circles will want to cite Hodge and say, well, Hodge argued for the validity of it. Well, that's true, but ultimately, the 1845 General Assembly adopted Thornwell's position, and it voted with no small margin, 173-8 against the recognition of such baptism. Thornwell would later engage with Hodge's view, and Hodge's published disagreements with the Assembly's decision on the matter, but still, that's an overwhelming vote of 95% of the General Assembly regarding the invalidity of Roman baptism, despite Hodge's articulations to the contrary. So, a person might disagree, and that's fine, but I just think that the overwhelming majority of presbyters in that General Assembly voted with the Southern Presbyterian position on that one against Hodge, which is fascinating from a historical standpoint.
Well, you can't trust Yankees. Yankees, I know Hodge.
I've heard this.
You get
so go with Thornwell, not Hodge. That's to your point.
What to say is the problem is you had too many Yankees in the room there, and it clouded the judgment. I mean, it was just a bad deal.
I think at the moment, but I will wholly admit that I want to continue to study this, including even more of the discussions between Hodge and Thornwell. But at the moment, I'm more so with Calvin on this, and so we recognize there's a lot of major issues here. But I think at the moment, though, if someone was coming in from Rome, and if it was really on their conscience that they needed to be rebaptized, considering how major of a thing that is, and it's not you're not transferring in from another Protestant denomination, I could understand how their conscience would really be hitting them on that. So I definitely at the moment lean more towards Calvin's position, but I definitely see a lot of the arguments on the other side, and that's something I want to continue to study. So.
Yeah, I didn't expect that we would settle that here tonight, so no surprise there.
Can I make a recommendation?
Yes, and let's hear from Nathan first.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Just like would just like to point out that Calvin's argument on baptism, Book 4th of the Institutes, chapter 15, section 16, is against Donatism. So the sacrament is received from the hand of God, not from the one who administers. So those of us who argue for the baptism of Roman Catholics, not the rebaptism, because we don't think it's valid, we are not doing so on the grounds of whoever administered it was not worthy. We argue on the grounds that the institution is not a Christian church.
Yeah, I think that's. I think that would describe the view of my pastors, more or less. Don't want to speak to him too much. Sean's already had. Sean hogs the mic. I don't know if anyone noticed that, but his wife will notice that and point it out to him. But that's his friends are used to it, so it's okay.
Brad,
Doctor, yes,
oh,
go ahead.
I was going to ask. I mean, it's September. This is a hugely, hugely important issue, and I think several people in the chat are obviously they're bringing this up. Are we still going to be discussing this in the summer, or are we going to lose sight of it? Because part of my worries is if we lose sight of it, we're losing sight of some very central aspects to the gospel. That's kind of the weakness of, as it were, this happening in September.
No, I think that I think this is existential stuff. If you're a Reformed confessional church, and I think it'll be resolved, but it's not going to be forgotten. I'm pretty sure of that because I don't know that we've ever had an issue quite like this, and there's 2 or 3 different dimensions of it, but it's a big deal and it's not going away. So, Dr. Hart, you're the senior. I'm not going to say you're the senior citizen. You're the senior
that too.
guest tonight. I mean, you're a little older than me, but we're both old. But you're any final thoughts you have or questions?
No, not really. I mean, I thought Wilson's comment just before this was intriguing to think about the timing of these things and how they play out through the courts. And I mean, I do think that the PCA, more than the OPC, puts a lot of emphasis on what happens at General Assembly. Obviously, the OPC does a lot of business, maybe even more business at the GA, but we're not as overture driven, I think, as maybe the PCA is right now. So I'll be curious to see how this plays out in the PCA's courts. And I don't know, if this can be memory hold by January or whatever. And it would be unfortunate if it were, because I do think this is a very important matter, as you just said, Chortles, existential in character.
Yeah, it's not going to be forgotten, and it's not going to go away. I think. I believe. Maybe in a good while ago, maybe in the 80s. I don't know. I don't think this would ever be a minor issue. But I think the younger generation in the PCA are more confessional and more explicitly Protestant than any except maybe the founding generation, and probably much better taught and more principled than even the founding generation of the
Brad,
PCA.
I don't know if this might be a Matt Lee question, but do we know how many people teaching elders have gone to Rome from the PCA? I know Zach Groff has looked at some of those stats, but
I think it's very few. I mean, but
we can't. A couple.
We can't transfer anyone. We could note that they were, we can't even dismiss them to a false church.
Yeah.
We could erase them. They should probably be excommunicated. There's some sort of discipline. There's 2 or 3 ways, 2.5 ways to do it probably. But action should be taken, and if it's not taken, I think you'll see complaints and
Yeah.
judicial cases even there. So no, this is a big deal. It's not going away. It's going to be with us, and we lost Nathan, but we'll bring him back for the closing seconds. Yeah, and of course, Resby, you have some familial connection to all of this as well, and you've been silent, but that may be just where you want to be.
Yeah, I don't know. I fail to have anything intelligent to add at this point.
Well, it is late, so, but you're going to tell everybody good night so that everyone can get some rest.
Indeed, I would like to mention. I think this is the furthest geographic spread in terms of panelists and guests, where really I think only an hour separates us in terms of time zones. If I remember my Brazil geography well enough, is that it's about 11 p.m. Eastern time here. Nathan, what time is it for you in Brazil right now?
Oh, I think he's frozen. He's frozen up. I think he is an hour ahead. I think it may be midnight there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well,
he is frozen. He's not that still.
It's just piety. That's all it is.
Yep.
It's a silence retreat.
That's right.
Just kidding. But no, thank you everyone for joining tonight. Obviously, a great show. I tend to think that this will probably stay front of mind for a lot of folks for a long time. I'm glad you could join us for Presbycast to talk about it. As you enjoy the music going out tonight, please don't be an Erdman.
Well, what you gonna do? Take his liquor and pour it down. Let the church roll on. 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 Well, the women in the church, they got paint on their face. Well, what you gonna do? Take a rag and rub it off. Let the church roll on. 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 Let the church roll on.
What's wrong with you people?